Well, thank you everybody. Good evening and welcome. This evening we have Marilyn Hurtling from Riverside Publishing, who will give us an overview of the Iowa testing that we do in the Londonderry School District grades 1 through 9, as well as CoGat at grade 2. So at this time, I'd like to introduce Marilyn Hurtling.
Thank you. Thank you very much, and thank you for inviting me. My name is Marilyn Hurtling. I am the assessment consultant for Riverside Publishing. And tonight I'm going to go over the Iowa test and the CoGat test for you to give you a background of what the test is and what information you get from it. To start off with, Riverside, as you might know, is now owned by Mifflin Publishing Company. We have many other tests, for example, the Woodcock-Johnson test, the Gates-McGinnity tests. We deal with criterion reference tests, with formative tests, and with norm reference tests. Iowa tests, as you might remember, have been around for about 70 years. 70 years of development, and they've taken all kinds of changes over the years. Perhaps you might recognize some of the booklets from the testing when you took the test years ago. Interestingly, this latest rendition of the test deals with critical thinking skills, and that's the basis of what the test is all about. They're looking for process thinking. They're also based on the very latest national standards. We have the Iowa tests are from grades K through 8. The ITED is the Iowa Test of Educational Development. Those are for the high school students, 9 through 12. And the other major test you want to be talking about today is the Cognitive Abilities Test, which tests the reasoning abilities of the students. So while the Iowa tests are achievement test, the Cognitive Abilities Test is the abilities test. The tests have a complete battery and they have a core battery. Depending on which grade level, you have different requirements. For example, some grades only get the core battery, which is math, language, and reading. Some grades get science as well. Some grades get social studies and our sources of information. So as you can see, the core battery is vocabulary, math, and reading, language arts, and the complete battery would include science, social studies, and sources of information. Now, the Iowa tests are norm reference tests, and norm reference tests are built very differently from criterion reference tests, like your state tests. Your state tests are set up to test standards. The Iowa tests are looking to see how your child measures against other children who took the test when the test was normed. So it's looking to compare scores. They're built differently. Norm reference tests, you have thousands of items that range from the levels of the lowest kindergarten student up to the very brightest high school senior. And you give this test to thousands of students. And then you take those scores, you put this a standard scale score, you take that score and then you give the test later to other students. You see what score they get, and you take that score and you measure it against that scale score, and then you can see how this child did against all of those thousands and thousands of other students. Criterion reference tests are very different. These are your state tests. These are, for example, your spelling tests, your classroom tests. And what they're looking for is, does the child know the material? Does he know the standard? And so these are not set up like the Iowa tests, which are set up, they go from easy to more difficult. A criterion reference test just wants to see, do you know the material? Do you know the material? Do you know the material? When you give a spelling test at the end of the week, you don't start off with an easy word and work up to the hard word. All right? You just give the material. Do they know the material? So this is set up to be a different type of test, and you get different information back. Iowa tests keep renorming, and your normed group is the people you are measured against. So for example, if your norming group takes the test in 2000, then you have a 2000 norm. If you want to see how the latest students did, you have to renorm the test, which is what we do. We keep renorming the test. The different tests are structured now to take less time. They have smaller tests so that the students can be more refreshed at the end of the test. So the ITBS test is in blocks of 30 minutes, no more than 30 minutes. The ITED, which is for the high school, is no more than 40 minutes. And there are many accommodations that you can do with these tests. There are all kinds of ways of bubbling it in the test administration so that you can see who has had accommodations. Now, accommodations are not to give anyone an advantage, but it's to level the playing field so that depending on what the child needs, what his disability is, then you can help out that part so that evens up how he takes the test. Nowadays, there is a new way of getting testing report back. Testing have always gotten score reports, paper score reports, and I've been in many buildings where they take their paper reports and they file them in this file cabinet that's way in the back. Wonderful reports, wonderful information, but not terribly easy to access. We have kept changing, kept developing. We have a CD-ROM, we have a PDF format and ASCII data files, but the latest that we have is going to be the best, which is the web-based information. And so what happens is your students take the tests, we score them, and based on that, you get your information over the web. So you can print out your own reports, you can disaggregate the information into your own groups, you can make control groups, you can in many ways manipulate your data so that you get much more information from it. And you can also make individual reports. So you have everything available to you. And you don't have to worry about all that paper in boxes coming and having to sort through. For parents, if you're interested, there are reports that give messages to the parents, both in English and Spanish, for both before and after the test. If you want any samples, just call me, and I'll be happy to send them along to you. We also have practice tests. We have, most importantly, interpretive guides for the teachers and for the administrators. And as I said before, the Iowa tests are based on national standards. So you have the national standards of math, and you have the NAEP frameworks. The NAEP, of course, is the national test that they give to some schools. Some schools have chosen to take the test, but this is not based on your state standards. Let me give you some examples. All right, reading. Depending on the year of the student, reading includes word analysis, listening skills, and then of course the reading itself and vocabulary. The more they study reading, the more they realize there are a lot more skills involved to it. And the sounds now, the phonetic structure and listening to sounds, being able to hear sounds is a very important component of reading. So we've broken that down and we can test that for the very early readers. When it comes to the literature itself, it is quality literature that is, some of it's written for the test, most of it is not. The literature that's not written for the test, that's published literature though, is not popular literature. For example, there's no Stuart Little or anything like that, things that students might have read in the classroom, because the idea of reading comprehension is to test comprehension, not recollection in the classroom. And so that's why the test is created that way. Also, what's interesting, I was an English teacher, and I had no clue that you could take multiple choice questions and create complex analyses from them. And so when I started looking at the Iowa test, I was amazed to see exactly what you can do with the short answer test. So for example, this segment here is for grade 3, and it's a fable about the sun and the moon arguing with each other. Well, when you look at the questions, you get questions like the first one, which is, what did the moon do at the beginning of the story? All right, well, that's a literal interpretation of the story. But then you also get questions like, what are the fiery feathers? All right, that's looking for interpretive analysis. And then finally, you get, what does this story explain? So you get critical analysis. So with a short answer, you can cover all areas of reading ability, both from literal to interpretive to analytical. And then we also then disaggregate this information on your score report, so then you can see specifically what your student does well in and what the student does not do as well in. When it comes to reading for the older students, there are more science and social studies passages. And for example, if you take a look at question number 40, it says, which of these is a water scorpion? Well, if you notice, the passage itself doesn't have a picture of a water scorpion. So once again, the student has to analyze the information to come up with the answer. So it's an interesting way of seeing how you can create questions. There are autobiographical passages, in this case from Wynton Marsalis. And now we get into mathematics. Mathematics, once again, is based on national standards. The math concepts, math estimation, problem solving, data interpretation. Estimation, when it comes to levels grades 3 through 8, estimation is a separate 5 minutes. The reason for that is that when we used to put estimation in with all the other problems, just say this is estimation now, the very good students who had plenty of time would work their way through the problems because they wanted to get them right. And instead, estimation skills are very important to see what their skills are like. And so we made it 5 minutes and we give 12 to 15 problems. The students have to estimate to get that correct. So they have to go through that. That's why we made it a separate section. And especially estimation is important nowadays with calculators. Students just push the buttons and they trust whatever comes out is the answer. Well, if they estimate first, they can figure out if they are close or not. And once again, we're looking for concepts, we're looking for critical thinking skills. We have problem solving, data interpretation, different questions, looking for math concepts. Here's some examples of the estimation. We have both word problems and then the pure mathematical question. And we have problem solving, such as freight car question. Now, once again, it's interesting to see how multiple choice questions have changed. This starts off with the typical, how many cars are in the train? So you have how many cars of each type were in the first 15 cars. Okay, typical problem solving. But then you get this one. It says 9 of the boxcars are painted silver. To find the number of boxcars that were not silver, Molly could. And then they list the processes. They're looking for critical thinking skills. You can't just plug back the answer and see if it works in the problem. So they're looking for thinking skills, and that makes this test much more advanced than the ones that were 70 years ago. Okay, when it comes to language, we test language, spelling, capitalization, punctuation, usage, and when it comes to the older students, we test their revision skills. They're doing this by, for spelling, there are 4 words, one of which might be misspelled. It's a way of testing 4 words at a time. That's not very confusing. Same thing with when it comes to punctuation and language skills, capitalization. They give 3 lines. One might have a mistake, and there's a no mistake line. Punctuation is the same, and usage. My favorite, because I was an English teacher, so I used to grade thousands of essays. And to my surprise, when you look at the revision passages, you can see that you can test more than just spelling in a revision passage. In this case, they give a paragraph, and the first question is, choose the best first sentence to add to this report. Well, that's a great way of quickly testing to see if students know topic sentences. Same thing with 31. What is the best way to express the ideas in sentences 4 and 5? Sentence combination. So there's a lot of ways of using, once again, a multiple choice test to get a more complex skills. Now, some of your grade levels are also test science, in social studies, and some test sources of information. The science questions, however, you'll see, are not based on fact or knowledge of the year's material. The science questions are also based on process. So they're looking for thought process. In this case, what they do is they list, they will explain an experiment, and then they ask questions about the experiment. So for example, they say, based on Gail's results, which conclusion is most reasonable? All right, so once again, that's looking for thought process, looking for the science process. It's not looking for the knowledge of the yearly curriculum. And they get more complex, of course, as the years go on. Social studies is the same. They're looking for the thought process. So they're looking for knowledge and processing skills. In this case, you have political cartoons. They ask questions about timelines. And they also have primary source information that the student has to read and gain information from. And the last topic is sources of information. And this is the way of doing research, maps, and diagrams. Once again, it's also process-oriented. It's looking for the knowledge of reference materials, how to search and find things, and maps and diagram concepts. Any questions so far? No? Okay, let me move over into the cognitive abilities test. And this is a test only given to your second graders. This is a test, however, that tests the abilities of the students. And an interesting part of this test is the fact that we reason in many different ways. This test tests 3 ways of reasoning. It tests reasoning in words, verbal reasoning. It tests reasoning in numbers, quantitative reasoning. And it tests fluid reasoning, which is the nonverbal reasoning. So by testing these different ways, you can see what kind of thinker your student is. And you can compare his strengths and his weaknesses. Very important in looking at these reasoning skills, because not only is it a great way of finding out how students think, but also how they learn, and better yet, how you can teach them. And so these cognitive abilities tests are fascinating tests, and I'll show you how easy it is to access the information. Once again, there are three batteries. The verbal battery tests vocabulary and verbal reasoning. And so, for example, they'll start off with pictures for the younger students, and they'll say, Nicole's mother said that is a bad, wait a second. Said that she had to stay inside. Nicole looked out the window and said, oh, well, at least this will make the grass green. What did Nicole see? Fill in the circle under the picture. So you have to verbal reasoning based on a picture. Later on, the older students get word analogies. When it comes to quantitative battery, they start off with looking at figures, buttons. And in this case, they say, look at the pictures, count the buttons, look at the other pictures, fill in the circle under the one that has 2 more buttons. All right, so they're looking for mathematical skills, looking for those number reasoning. By the time you get to the older students, you have something like this, which is, for every question you're given numbers and signs. Combine all the numbers and signs in different ways until you make an equation that equals one of the answer choices. So you have to move these numbers around until you get some kind of equation that answers, one of those is the answer to. Much more complex. And finally, you have your nonverbal reasoning, which is your figures. And so they're looking for figure reasoning. They're looking to see which comes next in the series, which would go together. This is for your fluid reasoning. What's interesting about you're looking at the 3 different ways that people learn and reason is that, for example, your quantitative and your verbal reasoning are used in school all the time. It's a very easy correlation. Your nonverbal reasoning, and Dave Lohman is the author of the Cognitive Abilities Test. He's done studies on this, and they found that people with very, very high nonverbal reasoning skills don't necessarily do as well in school. Because, and these are your architects, your engineers, the people who can flip figures in their heads, because there's something about that nonverbal skill that is impeding the typical verbal and mathematical reasoning skills. So it's an interesting thing to look at to see what kind of reasoner are you. And this is what you would get. When you get done with the test, you will see a comparison of how you've done. So for example, the verbal reasoning, quantitative, and nonverbal. And what we do is we put them in a graph, and you can see where you stand. Now in this case, the average score, two of your scores are average. One of them is above average, and that's the quantitative. So what the authors have done is they've come up with a profile. And the profile would be, you see this is the average, so your average, your stay 9 is a 5. So you have a 5, and B means one score is above or below. 5B, and you have a Q+. Well, Q+ is, quantitative, is your strongest reasoning skill. All right, you take your profile, and you take it to the website, www.cogat.com. Now I've given you brochures on the CoGat test, and on the back of it, you'll have the website listed right there. Okay? You go to the website, and this is the page you get. What they've done is they explain once again what the profile means. So you have, in this case, there's a 7C, and there's C. C means one's above and one's below the others. And in this case, 7 is a higher stay 9, so you get verbal plus, quantitative minus. All right, you take your profile, whatever that profile is. What you said, 5Q+, right? 5C Q+, 5B Q+. And they have a little box over here. You put your profile in that box and push the button. And that will take you to the website that will explain what your profile is. It'll explain what type of thinker that student is. And then it also explains not only what the student, the characteristics of the students are, but how to teach to that type of student. How does the student learn best? So this is not only good for parents, it's wonderful for teachers as well, because you want to, I mean, there are certain students that are more difficult to reach. You say, well, how do I teach to that student? Well, what kind of thinker is he? And you go to the website and you can find out what kind of profile and some instructional strategies that you can deal with. It's just, it's a nice way of getting access and being able to utilize it easily. Questions on this? Okay, one of the points I want to make at this point is the test itself. When the test is going on, there are several things you want to think about. One of them is you want to, as a parent, see what kind of day your child is having when he's going off to school. Because if he's very ill, if he's having a very emotional day, say his dog was sick or something like that, or obviously when he's taking the test that day, he's not going to be as good on his results as he would be if he were perfectly fine, if he were emotionally perfect. So a test is only a snapshot of how that student is doing that day. And you want to be able to monitor and see if your child's not feeling well, if he's out the rest of the month with some kind of flu, then you realize his test results may not be as accurate as they might be. Some of the other things you want to let the child know is this type of test he's not supposed to answer. Not supposed to. He won't be able to answer every question. It's meant to be that. And so he shouldn't feel that if, as he's going along in the test and he can't answer the questions, that he's doing poorly. That's not the case. The point is you want to see where he fits in that line. And so you want him to feel good about what he's doing and relax him. That's very important when it comes to taking the test. This test is diagnostic. It's going to give the teacher and you information about how the student is doing. And so it's very important that he feels confident and competent and also tries to move along, tries to answer the questions. However, and guesses, the idea of an educated guess, if he thinks he can fill in the answer, if he thinks he can eliminate some of the choices, that's the best way to answer the test, that's fine. However, if he has no clue, the idea is not to make little Christmas tree patterns in the rest of the answers or just to fill in all the bubbles because he wants to fill in the bubbles, because that's not going to give teachers or you as parents diagnostic information. So make them feel relaxed, set them to school knowing that they're going to take a test that's going to help diagnose how they can learn better. And I think that's the proper attitude about this test. It's a wonderful diagnostic test, but it shouldn't stress them out, nor the teacher. Information that comes back, of course, is all based on the normal curve. As you know, probably in 2014, across the country, No Child Left Behind has mandated that every child is going to be average or above average. All right, it's been legislated, and so we know that's going to happen. That's one of the reasons they can't use a norm reference test, because that's not reality. Right? You're not going to have every child average and above average. So, but these norm reference tests are indeed based on this normal curve. What it means is that most of your students fall in the middle, which is the way it's supposed to be. And interestingly, your district gets not only national percentiles, but also local percentiles. And this is very important to realize there's a difference. There's a difference in the scores. Your national percentile score is the score that your child gets when he's compared to the thousands of students that took the test when it was normed in 2000. That's one score. Your local percentile is a completely different testing background. Your local percentile compares your child with how other children in the same level who just took the test with him did. This will give you different numbers. So if you have national percentile, your child might be 92% percentile, which is wonderful. Nationally, based on the 2000 norms of the nation. However, when you have a local percentile, that's everyone he's tested against in his class level across when everyone else just took the test with him. So you have a smaller group of people being tested, being measured against, and therefore the number is going to be different. In many cases, lower. Questions about that? As I said, this test gives you a lot of diagnostic information. And while parents get the profile narrative, which is informative, teachers and administrators have a lot more information available to them, both about classes themselves and individual students. And so you get highly diagnostic information about types of math concepts, about math problems, problem solving, also about critical thinking skills, because that's another area that's disaggregated in our scoring course. So the teachers will be able to see how the whole class does. Administrators can see how the whole group of classes does. Parents will get this report, which is the profile narrative. And the profile narrative has on the right-hand side a narrative explaining what the test is all about. Also explains the score. On the left-hand side, you will have your vocabulary, reading, comprehension, and totals. You'll have your national percentile, you'll have your local percentile, and you'll have a chart and graph to show how you do in